Attorney General Ms. Clare Connors to talk to us. She was appointed as Hawaii's Attorney General in January of this year. She attended Yale College, graduated with honors, and later went to Harvard Law School. She grew up here in Hawaii but began her legal career on the mainland. Fun fact, she was nominated by President Obama to serve as a federal district judge for Hawaii in 2015. And with that, please give a warm welcome to Attorney General Connors.
Hi, thank you. It's a really important part of history. I don't know how many of you know about this part of history, but it's something that we thought it's important for all of us, especially women, young women, people who are going to be moving forward as leaders in this world, which I hope and anticipate every single one of you is planning to do, needs to know and understand, because it's an important part of who we are and why we are able to do the things that we do. So yes, I am the Attorney General. I've been the Attorney General for about 11 months. I was nominated by Governor Ige. The Department of the Attorney General is a really big department. So I run the largest law firm in the state of Hawaii. And I have one of the biggest departments too, because we have a lot of people who aren't lawyers who are supporting our mission. So our mission is to protect the people of Hawaii. That's what we do every day when we decide that there's an issue that we need to defend or there's an issue that we need to bring, right? So there's a lot of things that are important to us and to a lot of the different attorneys that we work with, keeping our children safe, Crimes Against Children Task Force, and we bring together a lot of different investigators, really smart people who are able to do a really important job because we prosecute people. When people violate the law, when they hurt other people, we take them to court. Does anyone know what the 19th Amendment is? What was that? Women's right to vote. So it's interesting that we say that, right? That it was a women's right to vote. Actually, some would say that women probably always had the right to vote, right? You could have read the Constitution that way, interpreted by saying we're allowed to have these rights, but that's not how people were applying it. So it turned out when women would go and try to vote, they were told, no, you can't. And well, why can't I? Well, because you're a woman. But why should that mean I can't vote, that I can't exercise this really important part of being an American, of being a citizen? And so it became clear that there needed to be changes. Do you think making change is easy? Right? If it were easy, we'd have probably 350 amendments, right? But we don't. We only have a handful of amendments because we have to go through a process, and it needs to be the kind of situation where we understand that things aren't actually happening the way that they should be happening. And that's what the 19th Amendment was about. It was really, really important that it wasn't about saying, okay, now women, you have the right to vote, but it was about saying we cannot be denied the right to vote. And we had to make that very, very clear, right? Same thing with the 15th Amendment when it said you can't be denied the right to vote because of your race or because of the color of your skin. So it was important for us to clarify that, and we had to amend the Constitution to do that. So constitutional law, understanding how amendments work, understanding how our legislature works, that's a very fundamental part about being an attorney. And it's a lot of fun. And in your U.S. history class, I'm sure you're learning about how historically people have interpreted the laws, how they've done things, how history has been made by virtue of the laws, how nations have been built. Our nation has been built, founded on laws, because laws are important. They keep people safe, and they tell people what they can and can't do, which is important, right? So the 19th Amendment was it was adopted 100 years ago. That's why this year we're spending a lot of time talking to people and having people think about what it might have been like 100 years ago, when actually you tried to vote and you were told you can't because you were a woman. When my grandmother was born, she was born in a world where she wouldn't have been allowed to vote. By the time she got to the age of majority, 18, she was going to be allowed to vote because of all the hard work that had started before she was even born. So there was a convention in 1848. It's called Seneca Falls. Hopefully maybe you learned about that in your U.S. history books. A lot of really important historical figures, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, really important names that all of us should know about, worked really hard to make this convention come to happen. And one of the big proponents was a woman by the name of Susan B. Anthony. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Have you seen her face on anything in particular in our currency or in anything that we have in our, have you ever gone to a vending machine and now it's popped a silver dollar and there's a woman's face on it? That is Susan B. Anthony. That is one of the women who helped put together the Seneca Falls Convention, and she gave a very important speech at the Seneca Falls Convention because of what she has done and because of what she did beginning in 1848 up until the time we got the 19th Amendment in 1920. The 19th Amendment is actually called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. But she was only one of many women who helped put this together. It was a team effort, and if you read your history, you'll understand how women spent so many times figuring out how to build associations so that they could work better together, stronger together, how they wrote publications, how they came up with different types of historical documents that they put together, because they knew it was important not just to document what they were doing and the kind of pushback that they were receiving, but also to be able to tell people like you, like me, what it meant to work through this process of making sure that women would not be denied the right to vote. But in that 1848 convention, they did something really important. They put together something called the Declaration of Sentiments. What does that sound like to you? The Declaration of Sentiments. Does that remind you of anything else in history like that? What other kind of declarations do we have?
Independence.
Right, right. So when you put down a document that embodies a moment, a declaration, that's important. That's a historical fact. That's something you can study. The Declaration of Sentiments was what this convention ended up being about, right? And the idea was that it was going to set forth the platform that women should not be denied the right to vote. That they should be treated equally as a citizen that can go into that voting booth and can, not because of what she's done, because of who she is, but because of the fact that she is a citizen of the United States of America, can check that box and vote for somebody. So that was the Declaration of Sentiments was modeled on the United States Declaration, as you said, the Declaration of Independence, and it created an agenda, right? It was important for people to know what the movement meant. Like, what are all these women trying to do? What are they trying to, it was a very simple thing as we look back in history, but there were a lot. This was what these women, beginning, I believe, sometime in the 1840s, up through the up until 1920, this was what they would wear, and they would wear it in solidarity when they would march to demonstrate that these are the colors of our movement. You think I should put it on? Yeah? Okay, I'll put it on. All right. We're in Hawaii, so it's around the lake. In 1848, we still had slavery. So the Civil War hadn't happened yet. So it was an important declaration for people to understand where this agenda, where women were saying, and a lot of them were abolitionists, they were saying, we're all equal. It doesn't matter if we have a certain color to our skin. It doesn't matter if we're a certain gender. We're all equal. But then in terms of figuring out how politically to maneuver through that, there were a lot of decisions that had to be made, right? Do we ally totally with the abolitionist movement? Do we ally just with the women's rights movement? It ended up being that they did both. Susan B. Anthony, who was at that convention, was a very strong abolitionist. When she was 17, right, so probably just around your age, she went out and she got petitions to end slavery. It was early on, right? She was in the 1830s, I think. So she had that sense of justice, that sense of being treated equal, and that was something that very much motivated her, empowered her through a lot of the different things that she did. So one of the really most famous paragraphs from the Declaration of Sentiments from this Seneca Convention was, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Does that sound familiar? Right? We've all heard that, right? That all men and women are created equal. It's a little amazing that we had to say that, but we did in 1848, right? That they are endowed with their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's all familiar language, right? And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are all things that everybody in this room has. That's an inalienable right that you have to pursue those things. Then that, as I said, began the next 72 years, where they were lobbying. Do you know what lobbying means? Anyone know what it is to be a lobbyist? Yeah, go ahead.
To advocate for something?
Exactly. So the legislature, which is not too far from you guys, right, the Capitol, they're about to start session in January. You're going to see a lot of people going to the state representatives saying, we want to lobby for some kind of environmental law. We want to lobby for some kind of law that's going to help children in schools. We want to lobby for some kind of issue that is important to us. So they go and they take their concerns to some kind of legal forum, be it the governor's office, be it some kind of legislator, and they lobby for change. So that was one part of the agenda, that they were going to lobby, that they were going to talk to legislators, that they were going to talk to congressmen. There were two things going on, right? We have two types of government in Hawaii, right? We've got our state government, And then we've got our federal government. And then we've also got the mayor and the local government. They're kind of part of the state, right? So they decided part of their agenda was they were not just going to focus on the US government, but they were also going to focus on states, because they could go and they could talk to state legislators, they could go and talk to governors, and then they could also go and try to get the president to change things, to try to get Congress people to change things. So that was important. Lobbying was an important part. They also marched, and when they marched, they wore, because that was the outfit of the time, the outfit you saw Wonder Woman wearing, but then they would wear a sash. And this is the color, this is what they would wear when they marched. And they would picket. Does anybody know what picketing is? With signs was a way that they could tell people, this is an issue. We want to give you some awareness about it. So that's another thing that they did. And it was all for this goal of making sure that women could walk into a ballot booth and they could vote. So, as I said, it was Susan B. Anthony who was one of the very premier people who was a part of that movement. And in 1872, so a couple years later, she did something that was a big no-no at the time. She went ahead and she voted. 1872, this is well before the 19th Amendment had been ratified and women could officially, as a constitutional matter, vote. And she walked in and they asked her a bunch of questions. They asked her about her background. Are you a citizen? Are you in good standing? All these different things that they asked every other man. And she said, yes, he says. So she and about 14 other women, I think, went ahead and voted, and then she went home. Turned out her vote didn't count. Later on, I figured out, well, you know what, that was a little strange. Why did she show up and think she could vote? Women don't do that. But she did that. And then afterwards they said, that was a violation of the law. You couldn't do that. I mean, and in the end they just decided, well, no, women can't vote. And so they invalidated her vote. Why? Not because she voted twice, not because she said she was somebody else, not because she committed voter fraud, but because she was a woman. So it was a very important moment for people to understand that that's how women were being treated. A lot of it was just showing a high-profile nature to that issue. So it's actually interesting because going back to the Wonder Woman thing, Susan B. Anthony has been profiled as a Wonder Woman, a real-life Wonder Woman. We all know of people in our lives that we would consider Wonder Woman, right? I'm sure some of you could name off a couple people that you believe have done wonderful things. Not because they have cuffs and lassos and stuff, but because they are daring, because they are brave, because they do things that show people that they are strong and that they care about other people. So when Susan B. Anthony did that, she kind of got called a Wonder Woman. And there are a lot of historical narratives and very fun pieces that were written in the 1930s and the 1940s profiling Susan B. Anthony as the Wonder Woman. And it's interesting because a lot of those qualities are qualities that we think about when we talk about women leaders, people who are willing to say, it's not just because I want to do something, but it's because it's better for everybody to do it, that I'm going to be brave. And being brave means you're scared, means you're kind of going against what people think you should be doing, but you do it anyhow because you know it's right. And she was doing things lawfully, she was doing things by writing, and she was doing things by exercising a right to show that this was something that women needed to be allowed to do. So, there were a lot of other things that were happening too. So she tried to vote, her vote was not counted. There were other women who used the court system, that they attempted to go through the courts and argue that at the time, who do you think was sitting on the courts? Think there were very many women on the court? Do you think it matters when you have women on the court? Do you think they think about things maybe a little bit differently? Yeah, they do. And that's just a fact of it. That's why we need more women leaders, because we do think about things a little differently, for whatever reason. It doesn't mean we think about them better or worse, but sometimes we think about them differently. And in the courts that these women were working with in the late 1800s, they just didn't have any women, I think, for the most part. Because women actually weren't that popular in law school. Most law schools wouldn't let women be in law school. Why? Just because they were a woman, right? And so there were a lot of things that women were trying to address. And this suffragist movement was highlighting not just the right to vote, but the right to be treated equally, right? The right to be able to go to law school, the right to be able to become a doctor, the right to be able to get and be a judge in a court of law. But that wasn't happening so much. There were a lot of changes that had to be made, and the court system was one of them. Now, actually, in 1878, there was an amendment that was introduced into Congress, And Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others were very instrumental in writing this amendment. It got introduced by a male congressman, and nothing actually happened. But it was that version, a version very similar, that many years later, so let's see, 1878, and then we're moving to 1920, became the 19th Amendment. So before we did it on a federal level, there were some states that decided, no, we should do this, right? So the state of Wyoming, for example, in 1890, said, well, whatever the federal government's doing, we can't 100% control that, but we can control what happens in our state. And so Wyoming passed a law, or passed some kind of legal mechanism that said women who live in Wyoming will be able to vote. There were other states after that, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, followed suit. And they said, well, if you are a woman and you live in Utah, or you live in Wyoming, you will be able to vote in our state elections, right? So that was an important movement too. When the states started moving along this line of saying we're not going to deny women the right to vote, that started to help some of the things on the national level. So other states followed example, and then eventually the federal government followed that example. And it happened to be an amendment that was introduced. There's a legal process that gets followed. You introduce the amendment, and then it has to get ratified. Do you know what ratified means? What's that?
Approved.
Approved, right. So it gets sent to the states, and Tennessee was the last state. I think you need 36 states. You need a certain number of states to ratify an amendment, and Tennessee was the last state to do it. And then 2 days later, we got the 19th Amendment. So the amendment to the Constitution that said you could no longer deny women the right to vote basically said that for any person who, no matter what your sex was, you'd be able to vote. So it was an important declaration that voting shouldn't matter, again, because of who you are. You get to vote because you're a person, because you have certain rights. Now today, there are about 68 million women who are able to vote in elections because of all the work that Susan B. Anthony and other women did. So this is the 100th year anniversary. We do believe that today we have senators, right? We have Senator Hirono, we have Representative Gabbard, we have a lot of women leaders, right? We have a lot of people who are able to come to you guys and to say, and there could be a whole other set of talks about what it is to be a woman leader and how to get there, but I will tell you I am here today doing what I'm doing because of what people like Susan B. Anthony did to show the world that we can do it, that it doesn't matter that we're not a man, that we're able to do these things because of who we are. And that's a really important part of our history, and understanding that. And understanding that it took 72 years to get the rest of the country to understand that. It is also important. So you guys are getting close to the point in time where you're going to be able to vote, right? And today I think we've got some documents that can help pre-register you, because you have to go through a whole process to register to vote. They need to make sure that voting is that you can pre-register to get to voting. Now, just because it was done in 1965, and what it basically said is, sure, we have the 15th Amendment that says you can vote no matter what your race is, and we have the 19th Amendment, but in terms of the vote, it turned out that different things were happening. They would put poll booths in places where people couldn't get to them because it wasn't in a place where people who were African American descent lived. And so they were finding out that actually the right to vote, this really important right, was not being exercised by people because of things that people were doing to prevent them from voting. And so that took an act, it took a piece of legislation to say, nope, you can't prevent a lot of people who fought for that, and a lot of people who continue now to fight for the right to vote. And London, England was an important place where there was a lot of international connections. And even now today, there are a number of people in the world who don't have the right that you have, that don't have the ability to walk to a ballot booth, or now probably fighting for that right. And that's why every time we have the opportunity to vote, we need to take it, because it's an opportunity for you, and it's also an important exercise of the fact you are free and able to do that. And every time you vote, you should think about people like Susan B. Anthony, and you should think about some of these people who worked so hard to give you that opportunity to be able to just check that box for someone you think should lead, or for some kind of initiative that you think should be enacted in our government. So that's the reason why we're doing this, because we don't want anybody ever to think that this was an easy thing for us to achieve, or that we should in any way think it's not worth cherishing.